me some pork chops, gonna get me some pork chops, gonna get me some pork chops, and whoa, 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 come here, come here. I suck at this game. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Bronze Age Minecraft, a series where we set out to recreate the Bronze Age settlements of ancient Greece. My name is Laskalos, and I'm a professional archaeologist and certified interpretive guide, and today I am super excited because we are going to start building our first real-world settlement in this game. Now, as you can see behind me, I've already started laying out the footprint of that settlement, and soon I'll start building walls. But you're probably wondering what I'm going to be building. What is the first ever build gonna be in this world? And that is gonna be Dimini. That's right, Dimini. And you're probably wondering, where and what is Dimini? And why is it important? And normally, I'd stand here and tell you all about it, but I'm just too excited to get started on this thing, so I'll explain everything during the time lapse. You ready? Let's do it. So let's start with the when and where of Dimini. So Dimini is in the region of Thessaly in Greece, and I'll supply a map for you here. Now the Dimini that I'm building here is actually the Neolithic Dimini and not the Bronze Age one, and there's a really good reason for that. The Neolithic Dimini serves as a good segue into the Bronze Age, and it shows a couple of incredibly important aspects of civilization. So when an archaeologist or anthropologist talks about the emergence of civilization, they'll use a lot of common terminology. And the two terms that we're going to focus on in regards to Dimini are social stratification and specialization of craft. Now for this video, we're going to focus on the social stratification term, and here's a pretty wordy definition. Basically, it's the separation of people based on their standings within the community, and it's the basis for early forms of government. Now, at the Neolithic site of Dimini, we start to see the beginnings of this social stratification, these layers of administration and government. And what's really wild about Dimini is that those layers of society are physically present in the layers of the town itself. Do you recognize the footprint of that building up there on the top? It should look an awful lot like the apsidal building that we made in the first episode. If you recognized it right off the bat, then you know that that's a Megaron. And we think that the Megarons held a key purpose in the social standings and administration of the settlements. As I mentioned before, we see these Megarons everywhere throughout the Neolithic, all the way up through the Bronze Age. And they are very important buildings. Some of them get downright huge. It is from this Megaron that we think that some sort of leader or chief ran the settlement at Dimini.
Wait a minute! Who are you?
Hello there.
Just a bit outside.
What the hell was that? As you can see, I've made an outer wall and an inner wall, and an even inner wall than that. And within those walls, there's different heights of the ground. You see, Dimini was built on a hill, and when archaeologists start to examine the buildings within the settlement, we start to see some really neat things. Specifically, the higher you go on the hill and the farther into the settlement, the more important the buildings get. And this is what I mean when I say that Dimini has that physical representation of social stratification. All that gobbledygook that just came out of my mouth right now, that means that the higher up you go on the hill, well, the more important you are. Okay, so it is the real life next day, and I'm back here at Dimini to do some final touches. Now, you may be noticing that it's a little sparse, and that's kind of by design. You see, this episode is all about building up from the archaeological footprint to give you an idea of what the settlement would have looked like as per what was uncovered by archaeologists. This isn't necessarily how it looked in its heyday, but I'll get into that later. For now, let's get to finishing this up. So what I'm doing now is I'm putting doorways and roofs on some of these buildings, and I'll be following up with some texturing. You ever played the original Doom game from '93? Yeah, I don't want this build to look like a level from that game, so texturing is definitely gonna happen. And when I'm done with that, I'll do a little bit of editing magic and give you a good flyby so you can see what the whole thing looks like. Now, while we do that overview of the site, I'll also put up a picture of the archaeological site so you can see the similarities between what I've built here and what is in the real world. I'll also talk a little bit about construction techniques afterwards. Okay, so before we get into the glamour shots, let's talk a little bit about construction. Now, if you go to Dimini today, you're not going to find walls like what I've built. Instead, what you're going to find is something like this. Basically just foundations sticking up out of the ground. And the reason for that is because Dimini was not built with cobblestone or stone, like how I've built it here, but rather it was built with mud brick. Now I'm using sandstone, so imagine it's mud brick. And there's one major problem with using mud brick to build your walls. Rain. Now when you have a site that sits out in the weather like this, with rain hitting mud brick, it sometimes only takes just mere decades for the mud brick to melt away. And once it gets worn away by rain, well, the next thing you know, you're left with this. Now, if you don't know what mud brick is, that's okay. Let me give you a quick rundown of what it is. For those of you that live in the American Southwest, you should recognize this immediately as adobe, though, many other places use adobe as well. But basically, mud brick is, believe it or not, mud that's been mixed with some sort of binding material and left to air dry. So imagine this is a lot like how one would make pottery, where they would take clay and add some sort of material to help it keep its shape. Only in this case, you're using mud, sometimes with sand or loam mixed in, and adding some sort of binding material, which could be anything, maybe grass or some sort of organic. It doesn't really matter, because what you're going for is something that, once it's left out to dry, would be rigid enough to build your walls with and relatively resistant to the weather. In this game, they do offer mud brick, and I would use mud brick for the construction here, but there's two main issues I have with it. One, the mud brick in this game, in my opinion, doesn't look all that good. And two, what it takes to make mud brick is a little too labor intensive for what I'm doing here for these videos. But enough about me talking technical stuff. Let's get into those glamour shots. Dimini as suggested by the archaeological finds. Now, next episode, we're going to look at artists' renditions of how Dimini should have looked in its heyday, and we will try to reproduce that a little bit better. But for right now, I'm going to go do some editing on this video to get it out in time for you, and, well, I'm going to get some sleep. So until next time, I'll see you then.